Many Americans think they know what Islam is. They think they know what Muslims believe, and they don't like it.
This is America. America is one nation under God with liberty and justice for all.
We could take one road, which would be a very negative one, or we could go down a different road, which is to rise to the challenge of our times.
When I grew up in my teens, I was 16, 17, I dreamed of coming to the United States.
And one of the main problems I found out when I arrived here is this misperception of Americans about Islam and the Muslim world.
Pastor Terry Jones, nobody, you've got a membership that is infinitesimal. When this incident took place, what Terry Jones shows is that there's a market out there.
I think that a growing national hatred or fear of Muslims as a group is one of the most significant problems facing our country.
I came to the United States in 1996 to continue my educations. So I went to Radford University and I transferred to Washington, D.C. at University of District of Columbia, where I completed 5 years program for business administrations. Then I started a business that is part of a family business I extended here. So I incorporated a company. And the company is for Moroccan interiors. We specialize in Moroccan architectural design and decoration for interiors.
Adil Naji grew up in Fez, Morocco. Like many people around the world, he saw the United States as the land of opportunity, a place where he could see his dreams come true. From 2001 to 2004, the number of immigrants coming from 22 Muslim countries declined by more than 1/3. For students, tourists, and others from these countries, numbers were down by more than 1/2. But in 2006, the numbers began to dramatically rise.
My dream is to come to the United States because I knew that I can do better. That's where we call it the land of opportunity. We dream. Movies, they make us dream. Books, they make us dream. When you read the Constitution of the United States, it makes you feel that you have a hope. You can do it. You can live, you can prosper, and you can share in a land of opportunity. And that's the dream was for me. Well, there were some hardships every now and then, but with what I saw in the United States, what I learned, it prepared me to be strong. My family has been doing the same trade for 7 generations, and the one that we recall and we have dead on that he's been doing this is my great-great-grandfather. He passed away in 1900. And we don't know when he was born. Then his son was... I was in Arlington, Virginia, and woke up at 8 o'clock. Then I heard there was a terrorist attack. Turned on the TV. The first tower is coming down. The second tower later was hit. Then we heard problems here in Washington, D.C. They might try. And then they said this is a terrorist attack. And all fingers were pointing to jihadists and Muslims, and I was afraid.
It's a very interesting situation. One doesn't want to lose sight of the fact that even before 9/11, you certainly had strong issues and problems. You had Sam Huntington in a very influential piece talking about a clash of civilizations. You had political commentators and others who were writing about Islam as a political, cultural, and demographic threat that Muslims were growing in Europe and America. But 9/11 and post 9/11 increased those kinds of issues significantly.
Other religious groups have been suspected of anti-American conspiracies in the past. In the 1920s, Roman Catholics were widely accused of being anti-democratic and of being loyal only to the Vatican. Jews also have been singled out as being disloyal. In many ways, today's anti-Muslim sentiment mirrors these dark chapters from America's past.
"9/11 affected me personally in a lot of ways. One was our very operation was threatened. Had one of those planes hit the nearby Capitol, our facility probably would have been engulfed in flames. We're that close. But after the attacks took place, one of the very first announced victims was a woman I had just come to know, Barbara Olson, whose husband Ted Olson was the Solicitor General of the United States at the time. I had just gotten to know both the Olsons, and she would die in the terrible tragedy there. So this was more than just proximity. These were people I knew personally were affected by it. And then I can recall my first flight out of a Washington, D.C. airport, and I travel frequently. I went to board the plane, and there was a problem with my seating, and I asked to speak to someone about it. They said, well, the individual said, you have to talk to Muhammad. And I remember the visceral reaction I had to that. Someone I knew had just been killed by a person named Muhammad.
You know, we've seen some significant changes since 9/11 in the way Muslim Americans and other Americans have interacted on this issue of the place of Muslims in America, what Islam is, and you know, we did see after 9/11, you know, a certain amount of, and I would say a great deal of generosity on the part of most Americans in wanting to take some time to get to know their Muslim neighbors. I mean, I was always astounded by how many people would show up at, you know, churches or libraries simply because they felt that they should know something. And I found that incredibly generous.
Interestingly, before 9/11, we were a very insular community, meaning we stayed within ourselves. We did some outreach work that was, you know, minimal in my opinion. But after 9/11, there was a huge interest from the community outside the Muslim community. So I had the opportunity to go and visit, and a lot of us had the opportunity to visit many churches, universities, civic organizations, to talk about Islam, because there was a huge void in this community about understanding of Islam. There was a huge fear of Islam. What is this? Who are these Muslims? So we made it a point to try to reach as many people as possible. And so going to churches on Sundays or going to universities on Tuesdays and Thursdays became something quite normal, and I'm still doing it.
What was very interesting is to see how many people were interested in to learn about the Muslim world, to learn about the Arab world. And I found out that in most of the universities, all the Arabic classes and the Muslim, the classes, the courses on Islam were totally booked and totally full in all universities. So there was a lot of There was a misperception, but also a lot of curiosity.
I was a little concerned, like, okay, well, what if somebody comes to our mosque? And I knew that there was this fear of Muslims and this perception of Muslims that wasn't how I lived my life. And so it wasn't like a fear that, every time I came to the masjid, I was like, oh my gosh, something's going to happen. But, in the back of my head, it was like, okay, well, let's see.
It was terrifying to learn that there were new amendments in the Constitution proposed, and there were some bills, and they're about increasing the security, especially monitoring Muslims and the Islamophobia, especially in Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland, because that's where where most of the government, all the government are based here, and you're living in 10 miles from the White House or less. So it was a fear, and we had to work with that fear.
There's no doubt there has been a great impact of the events on Islam and the way Muslims are and so on and so forth. But in general, I don't know if the effect has been as profound as we thought they were going to be once upon a time. I still see Muslims that engage in the community at large. As a result of that, I still see Muslims that are not. I see Muslims that are more outgoing and liberal. I see others that have gone into more of a reclusive situation where they say, no, I'm still not, I don't trust what's going on. I still see Muslims involved in politics more than they were. I see others that say, no, I don't think I even vote, and I don't think it makes any difference anyway because the agendas are there.
The Muslim life after September 11 in America has changed in certain way to the positive, to the right direction, in certain way to the negative. Yes, there have been attacks on Muslims. There have been cases of vandalism of mosques. There have been actual harassments of Muslims, or people saying Muslims should not belong to America or do not belong to America. Muslims should move out. There have been cases of preventing Muslims from building mosques. These are real issues.
In February 2008, an Islamic center in Columbia, Tennessee was burned by 3 white supremacists, later convicted and sentenced to 14 years in prison. This incident was not the first attack against a Muslim community in a decade in which some kind of attack occurred somewhere in the country nearly every week.
There is a sort of a sentiment against Islam in some circles in the United States of America.
I think that a growing national hatred or fear of Muslims as a group is one of the most significant problems facing our country. It is far easier to mistreat people who you are determined are, by definition, a threat to the nation.
There were lots of different kinds of feelings here in Washington, as much as there were in the church world. That I live in kind of 2 worlds. I live in a political world Monday through Friday, then I generally fly out on a Saturday night, preach in a church 2 or 3 times on a Sunday somewhere in the country, mostly evangelical churches. So I was hearing things in both places, and they were pretty similar.
These acts of violence against innocents violate the fundamental tenets of the Islamic faith. And it's important for my fellow Americans to understand that.
They were hearing what President Bush and others were saying. This is not a war against Islam. Islam is a religion of peace and so forth, which I agreed with in an intellectual sense. But viscerally, people were feeling something else.
When President Bush went to the Islamic Center 2 days after September 11, I was there. I was sitting with the president, I walked with the president. That message was very important for America to listen to and to hear. It was very important for Muslims to listen to and to hear.
Well, I went through a radical conversion to Jesus back in the Jesus movement. In 1970, I encountered the love of Christ, and so I've been about sharing my faith, reaching out to people from the beginning. Eventually, God gave me a heart for Muslims, and in classical evangelical way, I was sharing my faith, pretty focused on just salvation, etc. I think the events of 9/11, as well as deeper reflection on what it means to follow Jesus and a look at a globalized world has caused me to really rethink the Great Commission in the 21st century, how we live that out, what it means to follow Jesus. And so I had to step down from that role and basically that orientation.
Evangelicals have often seen conversion as the goal of any relationship with Muslims. Muslims, too, have wished that others would come to know and practice the beauty they find in their own faith. But one of the surprising developments in relations between Christians and Muslims in recent years is the recognition of the urgency of building friendships for friendship's sake.
If you want to talk about the interfaith experience in this area, do you think it's positive, negative? Has it had some tough moments?
I think it's pretty positive overall, especially in the Dearborn area. It's a very unique place. I just got here last September from northern Indiana, and it's unlike any place I've ever been. I've never been in a high concentration of Muslims before.
Dearborn's 40%.
Yeah. And I have never seen a group of religious leaders work together like they do here.
In 2004, I led a delegation. We took 100 businessmen from Dallas. They were predominantly evangelical Christian. And we had to create a program for them in Fez, whereby they will meet with 100 businessmen and women. We had a 3 days program. One of these days were to plan to send or to match a businessman or woman from the state to a businessman and woman from Morocco in Fez. And they had to spend the entire day together to experience how they can live together. And it was the next day they had to report about their experiences. When you bring together two people who have complete different ideologies, different religious background, a different thinking, and you put them together, and in less than 24 hours they start feeling like they're best friends. That was very, very touching. And when I see the tears in both Moroccans and Muslims and Christians, they said that we didn't know that Moroccans like that. We didn't know that we will be received in these people's houses, and we will be welcome to share food. In Morocco, we share food from the main plate. That means sense of unity. Families, they eat from one plate, and friends, they eat from one plate. So they experienced that as something very strange. They didn't have it before, and by the end of 7 days, That trip was one of the best trips they ever made, because Muslim country was outside of the radar, and they felt that they were more welcome in Morocco.
During the holy month of Ramadan, Muslims practice fasting from dawn to sunset. In most Muslim countries, it's a time for rest and celebration with family and close friends. Each night, families gather to break their fast and end the long day. On special nights, such as the Night of Power, they begin a long night celebrating the revelation of the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad.
The personal relationships that I've built and that have been built with me by and with Muslims has affected everything about my perception of Muslims and Islam, even Islam as a religion, that big. I've served on the board of the Institute on Religion and Public Policy for some time. It was in my role as a board member of the Institute that I was asked to join a delegation in visiting Morocco, which of course is an Islamic country in North Africa. And I was asked to represent evangelicals because I am an evangelical and I would be, I think, only one of two on that delegation. When I was first asked, I was really reticent to say yes because I'm almost embarrassed to admit it, but I was afraid to go on this delegation. After hemming and hawing, I agreed to go. I went, and what I found in Morocco was the diametric opposite of what I feared. I was warmly received. After that, it would become even more personal, because on a subsequent visit to that country, I would take my daughter, who a professional in her own right, a specialist in autism therapy, and she decided to stay in Morocco, specifically in the Sahara region, and teach there for a year. And after a year, to bring home a husband. And he's I love him as a son-in-law, and I enjoy him immensely, and he's become a very important part of our family. So now I say, I'm married into a Muslim country. All his family is over there. So all those things have been more than game changers. They have been life changers for me.
We bring together Christians and Muslims, churches and mosques, and we have what is called a Love Your Neighbor dinner. This is just one of many approaches we have to building bridges and getting Christians and Muslims together. The basic structure is the pastor shares about love of neighbor from a Christian perspective, the imam shares from an Islamic perspective. We have some Q&A and eat a meal together. In our case, first we went to a mosque, then they came to our church, and many churches are doing events like this. In our very first event, one of the Christians raised their hand and said, well, Imam Mahmoud, would you tell us, what can we do to work towards peace? And his answer was revolutionary. He says, read the gospel and obey it. And I was stunned in a good sense in realizing, I've never met a Muslim that has not respected and honored a true follower of Jesus.
When I was at Walmart one night, and this happened quite recently, this veteran in a wheelchair came up to me, and for a second I was kind of apprehensive, like, what does a war veteran have to say to me, if he's been overseas, or if, he thinks something, he might have a wrong perception of Muslims. And he came up to me and he said, I'm glad that you cover. And I was like, what? Because I couldn't hear him properly, and I was just shocked. And he said, I'm glad that you cover. And I was like, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And he said, because the Bible tells us to cover too. And I thought, wow, I was like, that's true. And I was like, and I really appreciated him taking that time out to, let me know that. And so there are so many experiences, and I could go on and on.
When people come to this beautiful country, like myself, they come into the land of freedom, the land of opportunity, the land that respects human dignity. Let me speak specifically about Muslims. We have so many doctors, engineers, hardworking people who really work very hard to provide education for their children, to improve the condition of their family. And they are here to participate in building America.
Our business is, yes, we are in a business because it's a lucrative business, but at the same time, it's a part of our identity. That it's been in the family for 7 generations, from the early 1300s. My family came from Spain during the Inquisition. They settled in Morocco in 1492. This kind of work is very dear to us because not only, as I said, it's a business, but it's also a reflection of our culture, our civilization, and our interaction with each other. We go back to the golden age of Spain.
On the one hand, what you do see is that, as Pew and Gallup have reported, American Muslims are economically and educationally integrated and increasingly politically integrated. Educationally, American Muslims are second to American Jews, and particularly when you look, astonishingly, at American Muslim women. You have 57% of, over the years, at least 57% of Americans, when asked, what do you admire about Islam and Muslims, say nothing or I don't know. But when you look at bias, what you discover is that the younger generation is, and it's not surprising, less prejudiced than the older generation of Americans. Why? Because the younger generation of Americans, whether their parents like it or not, exist in a far more multi-religious, multicultural setting.
I think, the younger generation gets it. They have a real sense of a passion for justice and mercy, and a gospel that's much bigger than just words. The gospel is much bigger than just eternal salvation or trying to save someone's soul. So a holistic approach and peacemaking, and the challenge to love.
The 10 years that followed the 9/11 attacks saw new pressures on American Muslims. But these years also saw some remarkable successes. Despite a sense of suspicion on the part of a majority of Americans, Muslims made great strides toward integration into the fabric of American society. One of those strides was the election of the first Muslim member of Congress, Keith Ellison.
To me, what's really beautiful about the election of Keith Ellison is that his religious faith was not an issue in the election. He was elected in a very politically progressive district for his progressive policies, but he never concealed his faith. People knew he was a Muslim. People knew he was a practicing Muslim. So he didn't have to somehow deny his faith in order to be elected, but the people judged him on the basis of his policies and principles. And I thought that was, that showed the best of America. That's the way things are supposed to be in our political process.
The amazing thing about the election of Keith Ellison is that he was elected to a district that is not only Muslim. It had a powerful, strong Jewish community. And he was able to reach out to them to say, listen, I'm American, and you are a part of my community too. That's a part of the public outreach of American Muslims, that we don't speak for Muslims alone. We don't speak for Islam alone. We speak for America too. We speak and stand up for Jews too and for Christians too. At the end of the day, the public square of America is for us too, and we care about it too. So Keith Ellison was able to demonstrate that in the best way possible, that I am an American for America, including Muslim, including Jewish, including non-Muslim. That's for me what brought Keith Ellison to the House.
But with greater integration, some communities saw greater challenges.
And what does it say to the people who feel that they are very much part of our society? I think that's a real issue. I think it was Time magazine gave a wonderful example of a physician, I believe it was in the Midwest, who suddenly discovered when they wanted to build a small mosque in his community, and he is perfectly integrated. His patients came from a cross-section, etc. Suddenly he goes to a meeting, and he suddenly is faced with people whom he knows, who he has a relationship with, and who come and realizing what they think of his religion and what the implications of that are. I think that can be pretty difficult to deal with.
As a Muslim, I believe that Moses didn't have it easy. Jesus didn't have it easy. Muhammad didn't have it easy. What makes us think that we can have it easy? We have to work on it, to build understanding and build bridges and to be patient. Human are human.
In this complex and sometimes heated context, people went about practicing their faith.
I look at hijab as complete freedom, because I wasn't told that you have to wear this or that this is something that you have to do, otherwise you're going to be, disowned or, So this was a personal decision that I made that I wanted to start covering. And since then, I've realized so much that it's God's commandment because it's a protection. And you see that, in your everyday life. And I remember very vividly in 7th or 8th grade, I was sitting in a classroom and it was some off time or something. And so there was a group of people and we were sitting and talking. And there was a boy who was judging the girls based on their chest size. And I was just like, oh my goodness. And then he came to me and he was like, well, we can't tell because she's covered. And I was like, thank God, because it's so empowering for a woman to be judged based on what she says and how she acts rather than what she looks like and what she's displaying of herself. Since when was freedom defined by how little our clothes are?
At the end of August in 2010, after we'd gone through and we were going through this very vicious attack on the Muslims in New York who wanted to build a mosque there in Lower Manhattan. And then the news about you know, the attempt to, or the desire to burn a Quran in Florida, other hate crimes, you know, arson against mosques. I was starting to feel very, very down.
You know, everybody paid attention to the Park 51 Muslim Community Center deal. Everybody paid attention to the ridiculous Terry Jones burning the Quran deal. I might say that the Murfreesboro Mosque thing strikes me as, in some ways, the most significant of all of them. Because this is just an average American community with enough Muslims that they want to build a mosque. Nothing especially symbolic about it, nothing particularly resonant about the location. Just a group of fellow Americans who want to build a worship center. That worries me as much as anything, because that says erosion of religious liberty protections and encroachment of hatred of some of our fellow Americans, kind of at the basic grassroots level. If it could happen in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, it can happen in any community in the U.S.
I think part of the issues that has been happening in Murfreesboro, that some people, either knowing or not knowing that they go through this, is that there was an Islamic center in Murfreesboro all along. We started way back, way back.
We did not have an issue at all until about 2 years ago, when basically we got our plan approved for the extension or the expansion of our community center. And then all of a sudden, you know, we heard terms that, like, you know, they're here to kill us. And, you know, we are at war with Islam and so on. So we were kind of shocked, saddened, kind of like, you know, we were at a setback. You know, what happened over here? You know, did we do something that, you know, we shouldn't have done? You know, and we felt at the time is like the majority is in opposition to our center.
The reaction in the community, the adverse and antagonistic reaction to the news that the Rutherford County Planning Commission had approved a very perfunctory, standard, ordinary procedure planning, building plan for an expansion of the mosque, as a direct consequence of that, and the vehemence with which that reaction was being perpetuated and promulgated, I contacted the Islamic Center. And I'm fairly confident I was not the only lawyer, but I haven't asked, and offered my services on a pro bono basis to the extent that any should ever be required. Well, I was met with great gratitude and very quickly was called into service to assist the mosque and its board of directors in a number of fronts. The number and variety of complaints against the mosque and its efforts to expand were stunning.
I don't know how all of this came to be, but a little nucleus of people, some with some money, began to, you know, protest this situation, that, you know, they didn't meet the requirements and it wasn't properly advertised that they were going to have the meeting. And of course the officials, who are of all persuasions, were baffled at this protest. And then of course it grew to where there was there were letters and there were all kinds of things going on, and finally they had this huge march down East Main Street.
There was some construction equipment owned by a private company, Big Earth Movers, that had been set on fire early on a Sunday morning. I happened to be out riding my motorcycle and rode by the site, and there were a number of people that were there, representatives of the Islamic Center, and I stopped to offer support to let them know that there was help available to them and that they weren't alone and that sort of thing. There happened to be some television news crews there. This was not an isolated incident, and unfortunately it was not the first incident at the site.
It was clear that a fire had been set, and that fire was on the equipment or near the equipment, but it was the message that came through the media was clearly, we don't want you here, don't continue this project.
And then, like the second day after the arson, I was here with CNN crew and with ABC crew, and all of a sudden we heard gunshots. And it was like, you know, several gunshots coming from one side and several gunshots coming from another side. You know, we called the sheriff departments and they came in force, and, you know, they basically confirmed from the neighbors that they heard gunshots.
So there was a shift from feeling so welcomed and so liked and loved by the society to just the opposite, or at least it appeared this way in the beginning. And there is always a reaction to every action. So the other reaction to this, a much bigger number of people, supporters in Murfreesboro.
We had a prayer vigil at the courthouse. And as we came out, of course, there were some demonstrators against what we were doing. We weren't doing anything except just offering some prayer for the community and for things to work out peacefully and this and that. And there was a lady who was holding a sign, said, we don't want a mosque here. And I wanted to say, lady, how dumb can you be? You've had a mosque here for more than 20 years.
I wish I could say that it was a period that passed without much effect. It basically, I struggled personally, my family struggled in a big way.
The people that I come in contact with professionally and personally, and I've had countless occasions in which people have said, thank you so much, John, for your letters to the newspaper, for your appearances on television, for your willingness to stand up for what's right. We just are aghast at how our Islamic community is being treated. My response to that is always, thank you very much, but I'm just one. Join me. If you are angry about this, let people know that you're angry.
The thing that I've come to understand with certainty is that when people are angry or fearful, often that is dispelled when they meet a person face to face. And hate can be dispelled, fear can be dispelled when we come face to face with a person that prior to meeting them were simply represented by statistics, by media reports, and by gossip.
In 2010, one of the holiest days of the Muslim lunar calendar unfortunately fell on September 11th, the day an unknown Florida pastor called for a worldwide burning of the Quran. The firestorm that ensued was unparalleled.
Pastor Terry Jones, nobody, existing in no place as far as most people would be concerned. But you look at Terry Jones, you go on a website before this occurred, you've got a church that's been up for sale for several years and nobody's bought it. You've got a membership that is infinitesimal. Why pay attention to it?
When I first heard about Pastor Terry Jones' intention to burn a Quran in Florida, I didn't really take it that seriously. I thought this is a very small church. Terry Jones is not a well-known personality, not even in the Christian world had anyone heard of him, so I really didn't take it that seriously.
When this incident took place, what Terry Jones shows is that there's a market out there. And if you capture that market, and if you give that quotable, you will get attention. So it doesn't matter that nobody is a minister, that you've got a church that amounts to nothing and is nowhere. But at the right time, you say you're going to commit a provocative action, and you can then get the Secretary of State, you can get the head of our armed forces at that time in Afghanistan, etc., to speak to you publicly, even offered a call, says something about where our society was.
People in our government who were very alarmed about it, and mostly because of the dangers it presented to Americans living abroad. And I was asked by one person in particular, can't you do something about this? Well, you know, I'm a believer in what the Bible says. When it's in the power of your hand to do good, do it. Not an easy process, but we were able to make personal contact. He agreed to receive my colleague, friend, and I. I appealed to Pastor Jones. I told him the eyes of the world were on him, that he certainly had the attention of the Islamic world, and that he could use that platform to proclaim the Christian message by deciding not to burn the Quran, or he could proceed and likely burn that platform with the Quran. And in fact, it wasn't just one Quran, he had a pile of Qurans. And he said, you make a good case. And it was shortly after that that he announced he would not proceed with the burning of the Qurans. My colleague, friend, and I were both very concerned that he might relapse. So we asked him to surrender the Qurans to us. We took possession of them, brought them here to Washington, and we've been giving them to churches that pledge to actually engage in intentional friendship with the Muslim community.
I was finishing my last term as president of the Islamic Society of North America. You know, I just spent 9 years almost as vice president and then president, devoting so much of my time. And I started to just feel that maybe we hadn't done much of anything. But then we were contacted by our friends, our Christian clergy, Jewish rabbis and leaders of that community who said, we are here to help you. And I'll never forget, the day in September when I stood in the National Press Club surrounded by dozens of these national faith leaders who were there to speak very passionately against the hatred and to speak very passionately for their love and their friendship for us and commitment. And then I realized that, that there was so much good, and that although the hateful people always have louder voices, that's true in every situation, we all know that these good people with their prayers and their devotion and their faithfulness would in the end be the ones who would have the long-term effect.
I have the great fear that the story of bigotry, the story of hatred, the story of animosity to others is going to be taken by some to be the story of the real America, and it's not. This is not America. This is not our country. And we have to make sure that our country is known around the world as a place where where liberty of religion, where respect for your neighbor, where love for your neighbor, where these things are the most prominent in our society.
As an evangelical, I say to those who do this, I say, you bring dishonor to the name of Jesus Christ. You directly disobey his commandment to love our neighbor. You violate the command, you see, not to bear false witness. And not least of all, you drive the watching world further away from any interest in our gospel message. Lastly, let me say one more thing. Watch out for so casually trampling on the religious liberty of others. You may be able to do that when you are the majority. But if you undermine liberty for other people's children today, your own children may one day see their religious liberties deprived from them. And the principles that protect Muslims today here in this country will protect Christians, Jews, and others tomorrow. And that's what makes this a great, great country.
The end of Ramadan comes to Fez, Morocco, and all over the world. A new day begins with the hope that the future will be better than the past.
We could take one road, which would be a very negative one, or we could go down a different road, which is to rise to the challenge of our times. But there's a way to rise above the conflict and contempt and fear and hatred. And the challenge is for us to do that as Christians, so we can meet the challenge of our time. So while we're here, and while the Islamic presence is growing and our contact with Muslims is becoming much closer and more frequent, we can meet that challenge as Christians in dialogue and in friendship, as we do all other peoples.